Hello, good afternoon and welcome to Tea Time SEO. This time we're talking about website migrations, one of my favourite topics, and I'm delighted to say today that I have got Carrie Shepherd with me, and also speaking today we have, in no particular order, three great presenters all the way from Switzerland. I have Sarah Makon-Sayag. From the middle of England, I have James Bavington, I think in the heart of Henley upon Arden or somewhere like that, and Benjamin Beckwith from Symmetrical. I'm not sure where you are, Benjamin, north of London somewhere last time I checked. But I'm delighted that you all could join us today. I see you prepared some great content. We've got some people online already. So for those guys out there watching, please ask some questions. Now's your chance. And what I'll do is I pass over to Sarah to introduce herself, and then James, then Ben, and then we'll get cracking straight away. So I hope you enjoy the show.
Hi, yes, I'm Sarah, and I'm SEO specialist at Leap, a web and mobile development agency. That is also a holacracy, so it means then we don't have a manager. I am a co-host of a meetup called SEO and Ecommerce Switzerland. And more on a personal level, like I am a mom. I have like 2 kids. Normally they show up on screen. Luckily today they will not show up. At least that is my goal. And I enjoy in the evening like taking some tech classes. I know, but now I have Netflix. So it's a month that I have Netflix, so I started coding less and less. But I'm enjoying quite a bit Netflix. That's all.
That'd be a good distraction from nighttime SEO work, that's for sure. Okay, thank you, Sarah. Great that you can join us. Over to Ben.
So yeah, hi, I'm Ben. I'm currently Director of Organic Marketing at Symmetrical, where I've got about 7 years of experience in the SEO industry, where over the past few years, I've been building out an award-winning department of SEO specialists. I've had a strong emphasis over my past 7 years on technical SEO, website migrations, implementing enterprise SEO strategies, and focusing heavily on user intent. And last year, kind of at Symmetrical, we kind of undertook one of our biggest kind of replatforming projects we've ever done, where we kind of replatformed over 140 websites over a 6-month period, and was a really successful project at the end, which we're really proud of. And then over the pandemic, pretty busy, where I kind of bought my first house. We completely renovated it, not myself. We kind of got some help there, and also my wife and myself are kind of expecting our first child early May. So it has been a pretty busy year in the pandemic.
Sounds like it. Congratulations, Ben.
Thank you very much.
You certainly had lots on your plate and over the last few months, but having a new baby will make 140 website migration look like a breeze. So good luck with that. And last but not least, James.
So hey guys, I'm James. I'm agency side at StrategiQ, and my kind of role, as it's always been, is to sort of oversee the collaboration between our kind of dev and marketing teams. My background is actually in development before I sort of transitioned into being a bit broader. Huge fan of sort of practicing SEO. And I've had a lot of hands-on experience. Our agency and I individually specialize in platforms like WordPress, WooCommerce, and Magento. I don't know, I found it quite difficult to explain what I've been up to in lockdown. What you probably can't see on the camera is I'm surrounded by loads of boxes of Lego, most of them unopened, but actually for the first time started building stuff during lockdown because there wasn't really anything else to do. So yeah, no, thanks for having me on board, and look forward to sharing some great tips.
James, thanks. I take it you've got a Star Wars Lego set there, have you? From your Star Wars graphics on your slides later, without giving any game away.
Yeah, there's loads of stuff.
I thought you would have. There you go.
There you go. I won't say any more than that, but there's quite a lot.
Brilliant stuff. Well, that's great. Well, let's get cracking. I think Sarah's going to kick us off. So over to you.
Yes, so I will speak especially about the planning and the strategy. In my opinion, planning is equally important than knowing technically what you have to do. So for that, I will focus on that. So We can go like, I will repeat the tips so we can go to the next slide. Okay, so one of the tips is like, let's say then you have like a migration, a complex migration, you have several types of migration, but clearly complex migration, you have a new server, you have like a new CMS, you have new design, obviously, new content, and nowhere else. So when you have everything, so it's a little bit complex, and ideally what you hope is to be introduced in the project at the beginning of the project. And then what you can do is like check the project plan and have an idea when developers are working on what. That helps you plan your migration. For example, if you check the tech setup, you know when they have the tech setup, then you can add your requirement, because once the tech setup is done, then it's very difficult to change the situation, and you really need to adapt. So for me, like, you know, when there is the go live, two very important moments for me are the tech setup and the go live, and you plan everything inside that span. So next. So that's like, I will also speak at Brighton SEO about that, and that's like something very important to me, especially because I work in a development company. What I've learned is that like developers are so important. You really need to know them, have a good contact with them since the beginning, because like they will help you to push forward your ticket, for example, or all your tech requirement. They can help you really to push them forward. And at the same time, so I think everybody then did a migration, and like in some migration that moment, then you are like, oh my God. And then you really need help in that moment. And sadly, you can do it by yourself. But if you are like a good IT friend, that will help you to overcome the problem. So it's very important to have contact with developers to since the beginning. And even if you are like, even if sadly somebody like add you to the project and is already almost at the end, first thing to do, have contact with developers. At least that is the first thing that I do. So for that is important. Okay. So when you plan the go live, I gave you an example here, like what you want to do is to avoid to do it like during a period of high traffic for the client. So when you have the migration, sometimes everything is fine, and especially maybe for small website, everything is often fine. Most of the time, I would say. But then there is always a risk, then the traffic like go down a bit and then it will go up again. So I would say, like I said, 1 or 2 weeks, but maybe it could be longer, like till 1 month. If after a month the traffic is not back, that is a bad sign for you as an SEO. And so I gave you the examples. Let's say, like, I came from Switzerland, no? So let's say then you have an e-commerce for luxury watch. So obviously the moment then they sell the most, it will be during Christmas. And then you don't want to go live in November, for example, because their slot, it would be between October and December for Christmas. So you avoid going like live in November and losing opportunities. Okay, so normally when you do a migration, you will have a checklist, or at least better for you if you have a checklist. And part of what I believe is important is like to break down the migration. So I just give an example, and I did it just visual, then you do it the way that you want. James probably will speak a little bit more about it, but like for me, what is important and make it easy is to know what you have to do in the preparation phase. When the website is on staging, then you know what you have to do in staging, you know what you have to do on the go live, and you know what you have to do on the follow-up. in the image, I gave some example. For example, in the preparation is like prepare the ticket, the new define with developers, for example. Check the situation of the actual website, so you have a benchmark for the future, and etc. etc. So for me, these are like the important thing that you have to keep in mind here is just break down your migration into 4 steps. So this is like the last tips. So by experience, I know that sometimes when people prepare the redirection map, the problem is then you want to do it as fast as possible. And so what happens is then sometimes you define the destination URL in theory, so how it should be. But that, in my opinion, doesn't work so well for 2 reasons. First reason, often till like 1 or 2 weeks before the migration, the client will change the content. They love to change the content. And often in a way or another one, it will be linked to the URL. So what you can do is just use the URL, then you know that it exists and it will be on staging and it is the real URL. So you can use that one. And also because some CMS, I gave the example of Drupal, what they do, they will act weird or not weird, it depends how you want to consider it, on the URL. So for example, Drupal by default, if I'm not wrong, it will remove all articles, okay? Then you can say we don't want URL we don't want articles in the URL. But again, just to make you understand the concept. So it is important, in my opinion, again, to take the final destination URL, and you normally have them on staging. So just use that ones. Okay.
Perfect. Perfect. Thank you so much, Sarah. That sets us off nicely with some very organized approach to planning the website migrations, like everyone should do, rather than doing it by the seat of their pants. So let's go on to Benjamin Beckworth, who's going to build on that now by talking about sort of websites merging and consolidating lots of websites. Thanks.
Thanks, Lawrence. So yeah, so I'm going to be talking about my top tips for website mergers and consolidations. Overall, there's going to be 7 tips that I'll be covering today. So we move on to the first one. I always want to start with auditing all websites involved in the merger. That's kind of the websites being merged, and also that kind of master domain that all those websites being merged into. So so you want to audit the websites that are being merged into the master domain, because you want to make sure that any historical penalties that they have aren't going to be carried over. So it's really important to kind of check that. You also kind of want to review those websites for any legacy crawlability issues. You don't want to be bringing over any duplicate content or kind of thin pages into that new master website. But it's also a really good time to audit the master domain that all these websites are being merged into. It's a great time to kind of clean it up, make sure there's no crawlability issues there, and there's no kind of duplication on that new master domain. So it means when everything gets moved over, you're kind of starting off with a solid foundation. You also kind of want to be auditing the disavow files. A lot of people will sometimes forget about this, but when you're merging multiple domains into one master domain, you want to kind of make sure that you're kind of auditing those disavow files to make sure that the master domain's disavow file includes the kind of domains that are present in the disavow files of the merged websites. So you'll kind of do a kind of a cross-reference and then make sure you can consolidate all those disavow files into one master list before you kind of go ahead with the kind of website merger or consolidation when it goes live. The second tip is kind of finding the corresponding URLs and identifying the missing pages. So essentially the one-to-one redirects. Especially with kind of a website merger, this is pretty complex because there could be hundreds of thousands of URLs that you're going to be assessing, and you need to try and find the right house of URL A from website A, which is migrating into website B, a corresponding URL there that makes sense. So to kind of map URLs from one site structure to another, certain kind of criteria that we use at Symmetrical would be matching URLs on the URL structure to kind of find a corresponding URL, matching on headings, or matching on the title tags. Another way, which is quite an interesting angle to look at, is match URLs ranking for the same keywords on page 1. So ultimately, if I've got website A and website B, you want to identify the keywords which cross over where both websites rank for the same keywords. And then you can identify, well, which URL ranks for those crossover of keywords, and then kind of then it's another way to kind of, I guess, map URL A to URL B across the two different websites. But also you can use a similarity web crawler tool, where if it's got a functionality to kind of identify web pages which have a 90 to 95% similarity between one page to another, that's kind of another way to kind of identify mappings from one site structure to another. However, it's not always possible, though, to kind of find a corresponding URL from one website to the other. So you also do want to identify the pages that cannot be one-to-one redirected and kind of isolate those URLs and then provide a list to your developers of pages that need to be recreated on that new website structure. Moving on to tip 3. So not all URLs need to be migrated. At the end of the day, if I was working on a website merger where there was over 150,000 URLs that need to be merged from website A into website B, I'd seriously kind of just go stop and kind of just assess the situation. Do all 150,000 URLs really need to be migrated into this kind of new master domain? Probably not. So it is an opportunity to kind of clean up the content and remove kind of redundant or low quality pages that don't really have much value. Certain criteria that we would look at is, has the URL received consistent traffic in the past 12 to 18 months? That would normally highlight if it's an evergreen URL. Has the URL generated enough traffic that it's a priority? Has it built up authoritative backlinks? Has it received seasonal traffic spikes over the past 12 to 18 months? Or is it deemed a priority to the business? That's a really key point, because if it doesn't have any other SEO value, if it is deemed a priority to the business, it still needs to be catered for within the kind of website merger project. However, if the answer is no to all the above, then most likely some of those URLs probably don't need to be migrated, and those 150,000 URLs could be significantly reduced, which I'm sure your developers will be delighted about too. The next kind of tip is to signpost to users why they are being redirected. Ultimately, if I landed on website A and then ended up being on website B, certain customers are probably going to say, why the hell am I here? Where am I? So you want to kind of give them an indication of why have they moved from why have they requested website A, but they've gone on to website B. So certain, I guess, tips that I would kind of recommend is create potentially a JavaScript overlay when a user is redirected to tell them, well, why are they now on this website B when they requested website A? Also, on the content on the website, you can add kind of a message at the bottom of the article to kind of say this content was originally from X website, so people can understand, well, they've landed on this new website, they've read the content, but they know kind of the content was originally housed on website A before it's been moved over to website B. Tip 5, you want to kind of rank for branded search queries of the merged websites. This is really, really important. You want to kind of monitor the branded SERPs of all the old domains that are being merged into the new domain. You don't want to kind of you don't want to find out that all the branded search queries have just, I guess, fallen off a cliff. So you kind of want to monitor them, but also kind of set up some precautions and to kind of enable the new domain to rank for branded keywords of the merged domains. What you can do is set up a category page on the new website, which is optimized for all the branded search queries of those kind of merged websites. Or you can kind of create an article to explain an article to explain this brand is now part of this new brand. And you can kind of see on the right-hand side, we did this with City Metric, which moved into City Monitor. And you can see it also kind of enables you to create site links. When someone is requesting City Metric and they're seeing City Monitor appearing, they can see in the site link that City Metric is now part of City Monitor, so it helps from a UX perspective. We would also recommend setting up paid ads to indicate that the original site has now moved to a new website. You can see that's kind of what ASOS did with Topshop, where if I request Topshop now on Google, it'll say that Topshop's now part of the ASOS family. You also want to identify keyword gaps between the old URLs and the new URLs. So if I'm kind of got website A, which is being migrated into website B, and you can see URL A on website A is ranking for 4 keywords, and it's a leads location page. Website B, which is the new master domain, you can see that with URL B, it ranks for 1 keyword. So there's definitely kind of a keyword gap between the 2 URLs. And especially if URL A is going to be mapped into URL B, we're potentially going to lose quite a lot of traffic because it doesn't rank for all those keywords. So what I would recommend here is it's a great opportunity to identify some optimization opportunities before the migration goes live. So you can take Search Console report, which includes both keywords and URL ranking for each website. Take the URL mapping document that you've created, and bring the keywords in for both URLs, so for URL A and URL B. Compare the keywords ranking for both URLs and isolate those missing keywords. And with those keywords that you've isolated which are missing, they're the kind of keywords that you're going to want to create as your optimization strategy for URL B. So that kind of will help kind of prevent any traffic drops when the migration goes live. And finally, just having patience when the website merger goes live. Ultimately, even John Muller said this last year on a tweet, website mergers take a lot longer for Google to process and reindex compared to just a general website migration. So you don't want to kind of implement any quick fixes, such as just removing all URLs from the old domain, or kind of blocking it with a robots.txt file with a disallow all rule. Ultimately, just have patience. And then kind of if you've implemented everything correctly from the planning stage and all the testing, ultimately you should be set up for success.
That's brilliant, Ben. I've got about 1 million questions coming out of that as well, to be pleased to hear. But hopefully some of the guys watching and girls watching will give us a few. But some great stuff there. So thank you very much. And we're just going to pass it now on to James, the other Star Wars fan amongst us, and he's going to talk about launch tips. Thanks, James.
Great, thanks, Lawrence. So yeah, my tips really are focused around launch, and hopefully they can relate to a migration that might be a replatforming, new domain, or even a consolidation like what Ben was talking about. And yeah, much like the Lego Star Wars comics, I've doctored the speech bubbles, just a lockdown coping mechanism. So yeah, let's jump in. So the first tip is really establishing that relationship with the developers. Sarah touched on this, and with a history in development myself, I can't stress how important this is for a really good, smooth collaboration at launch. And I had to work really hard just to refine this one tip down into a few bullet points, but absolutely sharing the opportunities of what SEO can do early rather than coming in late with the threats. Sounds quite vague, but it's very important, along with articulating the SEO value. So, if you're pushing for performance and you want those core web vitals on point for the, the launch of this new site, this migration, explain the value. Perhaps the development team aren't aware that it's going to be potentially coming into the algorithm later this year. So really ensure that you articulate, the opportunities and the purpose. Use data where you can. If in a migration or a consolidation, a whole piece of content, a whole section is going to be removed, we can calculate that and we can explain what that loss is going to look like in real terms. And again, that can really help with decision making and engaging developers. Developers love problems. Give them the objective and allow them to own the solution. But ultimately, it's earning the relationship, not directing the development team. As I could probably quite literally do a whole 1 hour session just on this. But John Moo he shared a tweet on Sunday asking, the industry for tips and advice. And if you follow that bit.ly there that I've set up, I think even Joe commented on this, but there's fantastic advice and tips on there. With how people responded to John. And then the second tip is really prioritization and really establishing that accountability at launch. So, whether it's the development team, the QA team, or even project management, it's really important to establish who's doing what, who's responsible for what. And if you're delegating, don't assume someone's going to do something, make sure it's there. And a checklist or a spreadsheet map to show you can be really helpful with that. And then on launch day itself, this is really hard to do, but record your observations. There's always going to be a few things that maybe not quite right or haven't been done yet, but prioritize them and then batch release them to the development team. So rather than having this like machine gun approach on launch day, just be aware that, like this developer in the back to tank, he's busy. It's launch day. He's got his own QA process to do. So be very careful and make sure that communication is 50-50. And I just love this post from Mark the other week. I think he was explaining he was working on a site audit, get the SEO involved the week before the launch. There is only so much we can do, whether it's time related, budget related. So just set those expectations early with what you are going to be accountable for and what you're expecting, from everybody else as part of the project team. So third tip, and this works really well for us as an agency. We build websites as well as do SEO. We also build websites and work with incumbent SEO agencies and teams. And what can be really helpful in a very sort of stoic, relaxed, organized launch is having and building your own core checklist of things that you know can go wrong or that you need to check in the run up to a launch. And if you take that assurance and putting all those basics down, in a document, it allows you to really concentrate on the nuances and niches of a particular site launch. And the great thing with a checklist, whether you're working on Google Sheets or maybe even Trello, we actually use now Process Street, because it means we can set up these fantastic checklists that we can alternate and assign tasks to, whether it's a developer or the SEO or the project manager. If we just jump to the next slide, please, Carrie or Lawrence. This is kind of what it looks like. And a bit like Trello, if you use it correctly, it's completely free. And as I say, it's a really good way, whether you use Process Street or something else, just to build up all those core things that you would always want to check on a migration or a launch, that whether it's submitting an XML sitemap into GSC or checking the robots no index has been removed from the staging site. And then really the kind of last tip from me is, when you're working maybe as a consultant and you've got to work with that external team, is to really kind of build something bespoke off the back of your own knowledge and checklist. So, if you layer up what you already know with this single point of view, it allows visibility, delegation, but most importantly, as I said earlier, kind of that accountability as to who's doing what. So if you don't have the access yourself to submit that XML sitemap, who is going to be doing that on the day of launch? You can build it up throughout the entire project timeline. And as I said, it's a great point of reference. And, in tying in with this, because, you're never going to be the only one that's involved in a website launch, what is that communication strategy for launch day? Is there a Slack channel open? Is it email? Do we need to be updating things on the spreadsheet? So if we could jump to the next slide, please, Carrie. This is just a screenshot. No one spreadsheet that I make looks the same with our team. And I appreciate a spreadsheet made by somebody, in the eyes of anyone else, looks a mess and it's hard to understand. But the point here is this ties in as well with what Sarah was saying earlier about the stages of a project, and you might not be able to see the detail in the screenshot, but we can very easily guide a task through awaiting implementation by the developers through to ready for launch, for example. And I find it so much easier to sort of relax and focus and collaborate with my team when everything is succinctly in one place rather than on various reports and in people's heads. So I hope those tips help.
That's great. Thank you, James. Well, thank you all, Sarah, Benjamin, and James. I think Carrie's come back on. So if we've got any questions, do you fielded from the audience? Let's fire away, Carrie.
Yeah. First question we have is for Benjamin. What is the maximum number of sites you have merged into one domain, and how long did it take you? How long did you take to plan for this from start to finish?
So the largest project it's going back a couple of years, where we worked with a job portal where they had a lot of local job portal websites and subdomains and lots of other domains that we could have merged to one parent job website. And there was about 60 websites that we merged into one kind of centralized website. So it was quite complex because it was all about locations, where it was dedicated. We had lots of local job portals dedicated to one area, so we had to kind of map all the locations from that subdomain to the main kind of parent website on the correct location structure. From start to finish, that kind of project took about 6 months from planning all the way through to kind of execution.
Just on that point, it was really a question I had for everyone, really. You're all working in agencies, and you never know when you find, perhaps someone on the business development side has sold a client or wants you to pitch for a big client with a big migration project. How do you estimate how much time and effort a website migration is going to take? Especially when you're in that, you've got to go out and actually pitch to someone. So anyone can pick that up.
I'm happy to kind of start that. So I guess, it's pretty difficult to sometimes kind of plan exactly how long it's going to take. A lot of the time we kind of base it off historic projects of kind of like how long has it taken us historically to do a very similar project. So the more we've done in the past helps us to kind of dictate how long it's going to take for one that we're going to pitch for. And it's ultimately trying to get as much information out of those clients at the beginning, kind of their timeframes, how many URLs are involved, what resource they've got internally. But ultimately, we'll kind of look at, we'll do an audit beforehand of trying to see how many URLs will be affected, and just look at historic projects really to kind of figure out pricing.
Okay.
The only thing I'd probably add to that is that kind of research phase that Ben spoke about. Obviously, the more time you spend on something, the more you can kind of weigh it really. But there are always things which kind of catch you out. And we did a sort of enterprise migration last year. We had to migrate various websites, converge them into one, and they were all with different teams, different CMSs that we'd never encountered before. So there is a certain level of, as Ben was saying, just experience that helps you do that. Perhaps building in a bit of a buffer as well to the project planning, but to the budgets, but also the timing, just to make sure that if that one team over there with their work takes a while to come back to you, that it's all factored in. But it's definitely something that we learn from every project that helps inform us on how we quote the next one.
So you can't beat experience by the sounds of things. Sarah, do you have anything to add to that, or would you agree?
No, I agree with what they say. Is exactly the same for me. What happens, I work Scrum normally, so I will have like a product owner, then he will sell something and normally will come to me, and it will be based on the experience on similar project, and there will be really like the phase of crawling and trying to analyze a little bit the website to know how many days should we sell. And yes, sometimes it happens. Then I say something, and then I find some unexpected problem, and it takes a little bit longer, and that makes it sometimes a bit difficult. So it's always good to have some extra days.
Right, perfect. Okay, thank you. Carrie, do you have anything else, or?
Yeah, we just have one more question for Sarah. In your planning, you talked about a text setup, and how long did you say that was in terms of days?
So normally the text setup, what happen is like it's done by the developers. So you need to discuss like with them what is the text setup for them, and at the same time, so they will take maybe 1 month to figure it out if it's a complex website with a lot of API and a complex backend. But you don't have this problem. So what you do is you go there with your requirement, and you can figure it out maybe in a couple of days, and say, these are my requirements, and then start to discuss with them and see, okay, so if you have this technology, how can we arrive to this? Even basic stuff, even like say, oh, I want the client then as a title tag, then he can write his own title tag, for example. Okay, more basic than that, you can have it. And it depends on the technology. It could ask for quite a bit of development. So I would say each text setup, it would be maybe 2-3 days, because you have to negotiate, you have to understand what they're doing, you have to negotiate with them, and you have to find a solution that makes everybody happy. So I would say anyway, keep 2-3 days for your negotiation and to make everybody happy.
I think it's coming loud and clear from everybody here, and I know running a software business that developers are your friends, and you need them on side and motivated and engaged in the process, so they feel it's their baby. They're going to go the extra mile to actually deliver great results for you or your clients. So I appreciate every project's different, so I'm going to try and ask a couple of quick generic questions. I just want to touch on maybe a question on planning, the migration itself, post-launch. So it's just on the planning side. We haven't touched much on user testing. What's your approach to user testing before migrating and after the site migrates? How do you know you've got your job, you've done a good job and things are going to be better for the users? Anyone want to come in on that? Go on, Sarah. You can. You've got the mic. You had it last. So go for it.
Okay, so I will start, and I'm sure then the other one will go on. So for me, it's like everything is based on benchmark. So like I will check the situation of their actual website, and then when the website will be migrated, like you have the benchmark, then it's like maybe organic traffic. I don't know now, they are core web vitals. So for example, what were their core web vital before and what is now? So you have a list of benchmark, then you add of the old website and you have like the new website. And then you will understand, did I do a good job? Yes or no?
Yeah.
So that will help you in that process.
Okay, perfect. So benchmarking data, of course, really important. Guys, anything to add to
that? I'd probably just add, yeah, I think benchmarking is critical. That kind of tells us kind of success from the beginning. A lot of the testing that we'll kind of be doing is identify all those priority URLs and keep on recrawling and retesting them on staging environment to kind of make sure they're going from the old destination to the new destination, and it's kind of, and the kind of expect, and I guess the expected result is kind of what we want. And then when the website migration goes live, we keep on testing those kind of redirects over and over again. We also will be monitoring kind of UX metrics to kind of have a look at, from the benchmarking perspective, what were the UX metrics prior to the website migration, what's the kind of UX metrics post-migration as well, to kind of make sure that time on site is kind of staying pretty stable. It's not kind of, gone down. Bounce rate isn't kind of increasing. It's kind of staying stable. It's improved. But yeah, the benchmarking is critical from our perspective.
Okay, all right, great. Actually, let me just ask a build on that and ask a slightly different question then to James. Maybe I'll let you come in on this one. So you've set yourself some targets. We've all done website migrations. We want organic traffic to go up. We want the user experience to improve, maybe pages to load faster, maybe them to meet accessibility guidelines, etc. So what happens when you find an anomaly? And I'll give you an example. Let's say the current site that you're migrating ranks really well for an irrelevant page that's generating a lot of traffic. Bear in mind, you've got an overall organic traffic target. What do you do with an anomaly like that?
So I guess maybe an instance of, say, a category page carrying 2 or 3 keywords actually takes a bit of a drop despite all.
Yeah, so maybe the page on the other side. I'll give you a random example. Let's say let's take up the Authoritas site. At one stage, we were ranking for, I don't know, PR-friendly press releases or something we didn't really want to rank for. Generated a huge amount of traffic, most of it from countries we weren't interested in necessarily, but generates a big lump of traffic. You've got an overall metric to improve traffic, and then just getting rid of that page is not going to bring you any sales, not really any conversions, but it's going to have an impact on your overall metrics. What would you do in a situation like that? How do you deal with these kind of anomalies that just anomalies that throw up?
I guess it's just weighing up what you've lost. If it's a piece of long-tail content that's bringing people in who then may digest other content, whether or not that's really a highly converting page. If it's acted upon pretty quickly, it can be recovered. You could rebuild that page of content, and you could ensure that URL is no longer orphaned, or if it was 301ing to one page, you could bring it back. But it's just making an individual judgment on what it is. Whereas if, say, for example, there's an e-commerce category that's been forgotten, God forbid, during a migration, then again, or it's just not quite performing as well. There's only so much I think you can do and plan to make sure that maybe the page titles, meta description, content, document outline is pretty much like for like. Mm-hmm. But there are so many anomalies that could interfere with an unexpected drop or a loss of content. So I won't try and use the "it depends" answer, because ultimately you've got to make an assessment on that anomaly as it arises and take the appropriate steps to action it. But if it is that PR example, it's just trying to work out, well, where was that traffic going and where did it go on to when we previously had it. There's not really going to be a huge amount of effort to actually restore that page, and then potentially start to think about how you could turn it into a more converting or performing page.
Perfect.
For later down the line.
Well, that's great. So thank you for that, and I'll give Ben or Sarah to come in on another type of anomaly that I've seen in implementation. This would be a good example where you're migrating an old site, and let's say it's got some great blog articles, but they're old, 3, 4, 5 years old, but they're performing well. You want to migrate them to your blog. Do you just migrate them? Do you migrate them and update them with the date they've been published on a new site, or do you migrate them, update the date, and update the content? Or something else entirely different? Sarah, Ben, what would your approach be?
Yeah, I can come in. I personally would go down your option 3, which is kind of well, if they're performing really well but they're really old, is kind of migrate them. But I'd give them a content refresh at the same time, as well as kind of a date stamp. That's kind of the ultimate scenario. I guess ultimately, if you're just going to change the date stamp but the content doesn't change, you're trying to trick the search engines, aren't you? That something's physically changed on the site, but actually the content,
never do that. Never ever.
Nothing's happened. But no, ultimately, if you've got the resource to kind of re-optimize that content at the same time, because it is 4 or 5 years old, then I would take that steps. But I'd probably do some analysis beforehand to kind of go, well, where are they ranking now, those articles? But also look at the SERP. At the end of the day, who you rank for those articles that you're performing really well for. I guess what other results are you up against? Is there any fresh content that you're up against on page one? If all the articles are pretty outdated, then I'd maybe not prioritize kind of refreshing some of those articles right away. I'd maybe migrate them and then update them once you've got a bit more resource. But if you kind of look at the SERP and kind of go, okay, we're ranking fairly well, but maybe the results ranking first and second, and we're maybe third, kind of got a date stamp of the past few months, where ours is from 5 years ago, I'd probably be prioritizing to re-optimize those as kind of as a priority, kind of as part of the website migration.
Perfect. Okay, thank you for that. I'm just conscious of time, and I think if I ask the same question to everybody, we won't get through as many topics. So I'm going to finish up the 2 questions, and hopefully that will wrap up. Sarah, you mentioned that you'd expect to see an impact in traffic of 1 to 2 weeks, perhaps a decline in traffic after a migration. Is that the kind of expectation you'd set to clients generally?
So what I do when I have to speak to a client, I will always be very clear, like, my goal is to bring you to the same level. I will say that like this, and I will say maybe there could be a decrease, maybe not. And again, normally I see it more like it depends on this, on the technology. Sometimes it's really excessive, this change than we have. But again, I will try to really set expectation and say my goal is to bring you to the same level, not higher. Sometimes it happens and everybody's happy, but like, just to make it clear. And I always also say it could happen, then there is a decrease of traffic, just be aware. Again, with migration, to be honest, you never know. Sometimes everything works fine.
No. Okay, and lots of people have asked this question over the years. James, just really quickly, and Ben, what would you say? How do you set clients' expectations in terms of what will happen to traffic after a migration?
Yeah, I guess from my perspective, we'd always try and do some benchmarking analysis prior to the migration, where if it was a website merger, ultimately there could be a loss in traffic, because if you're merging 2 websites into one, you might be going from having 2 listings because of 2 websites going into 1 website. So we would always typically do some kind of search console analysis there to look at the crossover of keywords to try and calculate the percentage that might be lost just off the back of the merge. Otherwise, we'd also kind of look at, well, what URLs are being removed. We've had scenarios with website migrations where the developers have limited us how many one-to-one redirects can be put in place, and we can only prioritize X number of URLs. So then we would calculate, well, of the URLs that we can't redirect, this is the potential loss in traffic off the back. So we'd always kind of put those caveats in. But then otherwise, I'd probably say in the first couple of weeks, we might take a hit of maybe 10% in traffic, but then ultimately would hope to kind of go at least kind of hit where they were and then go above and beyond. But it depends on the types of migration. If I did a merger, I'd hope that the traffic's gone up, where if it was just kind of re-platform, then maybe the traffic's not going to go up as quickly. Okay,
perfect. Anything to add to that, James?
No, I think Sarah and Ben have covered it really well, but it's, it is just a case of trying to work out really, as Ben was saying, if you do have 2 fishing rods in the pond and there's only going to be one, there could be a little bit of loss. And I think Sarah's right in the sense of saying that, to manage expectations, that we want to retain what is there. If it's maybe it's a re-platforming or upgrading Magento 1 to Magento 2. As an example, but anything additional that's a benefit from the new website being better, being faster, being better optimized is a bonus as opposed to a promised incentive.
Okay, all right, perfect. Thank you very much. I've got one final question for you all. Okay, you've got your brand new shiny website live. It's better for the user. It's faster, etc., etc. You hand it over to the internal in-house team or to your client. How do you stop them messing up your great work? So just one sentence each, just to finish off. Who wants to come in first? Sarah, how do you stop them messing up your great work?
There is no miracle. You follow up with them. You continue working with them. That's the only solution.
Right.
And you educate them.
Perfect. Okay, James?
I'd like to say limit their options in the CMS, but
okay.
train and guide and coach how to utilize the features in the CMS and ensure that only the things they need they have access to. Perfect.
Okay, and Ben, last but not least.
As far as I don't think I've got anything new to say. I think it would just be the education piece and kind of giving them a guide on kind of once the migration's happened, if there has been change in functionality, how to kind of implement things, making sure that they've got all the kind of testing in place from their side, that they keep on checking the redirects, got all the keywords being monitored so they can react if something does happen.
Perfect. The reason I asked that question last is there's going to be thousands of sites, and developers, hundreds of thousands, probably all working on Core Web Vitals right now and trying, there'll be CEOs like me going, I want 100, and they'll be driving their teams nuts to try and achieve this. And of course they'll go live, and then 5 minutes later, someone will change something, install a new plugin or something, and the pages will slow down considerably. So avoiding regression is something that's often missed, but obviously an important part of the whole process. So with that, I'm going to close up. My tea has gone cold, but it's a really great topic. Thanks so much for your time and effort, guys, in preparing it. I hope everyone who's online has enjoyed it. So please, like the video, share, tune in next time, and absolutely, we're welcome to hear from anybody. So if you'd like to talk, then please get in touch with the team. You know where to find us. So thank you very much, Sarah. Thank you, James, and thank you, Ben. Thank you, Carrie. Our next talk is, Carrie, when is it?
Thank you.
Thursday, the
8th of April. Yeah.
8th of April at 4 o'clock. So join us then, and it will be a technical tea time SEO session, probably just before Core Web Vitals. So you can imagine what's going to be on the agenda. Thank you ever so much, guys. We'll see you all again soon. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.